Welcome to Revolving Time. On this channel, I share and narrate gripping stories about cheating wives. There are many kinds of cheaters, each with their own unique tale to tell. With a realistic voice, I offer my insights and advice on what to do in these situations. I stole a quick glance at my lunch companion as she watched a distinguished gentleman make his way back from a bar. His name was Roger Morris. Outwardly, there was nothing particularly remarkable about him, except for the undeniable evidence of his wealth. His fortune was reflected in the impeccable shine of his Fargo shoes. My ex-husband owned the same pair, $1, 800 shoes that he never even wore. Kathy, my lunch companion, was one of the office's social climbers. The problem with her strategy was that the corporate ladder she was climbing had rung so worn and slippery that a single misstep could send her tumbling down, flat on her back, burdened with a $20,000 divorce lawyer bill. And Roger Morris wouldn't be the one footing that expense. He'd make sure of that. She certainly played the part. If I were a man, I might have taken the bait. It would be foolish not to. Roger, however, was already indulging every chance he got. And if he wasn't, then one of his high-profile clients certainly was. That was the price of being a company girl. You got the bigger desk, the corporate travel perks, and the illusion of success, but in return, you paid a different price. A price that often involved compromising situations, favors exchanged behind closed doors, and nights at places like the DoubleTree that left memories best forgotten. "Kathy, you didn't mention Valentina will be joining us this afternoon," Roger said, flashing a confident, almost predatory smile. It was a last-minute thing. Roger, I was starving, and you know how much I love Antoine's crusted scallops. I matched his smile with one of my own, slipping into my well-practiced game face. He had seen it before, up close and personal. "Val, I didn't know you knew Roger," Kathy remarked with curiosity. She didn't need to know the details. If she did, she might have felt threatened, unnecessarily so. "Oh, yes," I replied smoothly. "I used to work for Roger. Some of my best work was with him." Roger's smirk softened into something smoother, more charming. Val was the best. She could teach you a thing or two. One of the finest corporate attorneys in the city, bar none. He was pouring on the charm, perhaps entertaining the thought of securing a 2-for-1 deal. That was the flaw with men like Roger. They only thought as far as their desires carried them, never any further. The real power in the room wasn't in the confidence of his stride or the sharpness of his suit. It was in the minds of the people sitting across from him. Kathy's coy smile told me she was already sizing up the possibilities, perhaps unaware, or maybe fully aware, of what Roger had in mind. I had seen this play out before. As the waiter brought our drinks and we placed our lunch orders, I watched Roger closely. "Yes, Roger and I go way back," I continued. "He hired me right out of law school, handed me a set of corporate travel cards, and planted me in the office next to his for 16-hour days. Of course, it wasn't all work. There were other moments mixed in, but Roger, dear, is a relentless taskmaster. He burned me out after 5 years, though I must admit, he prepared me for anything the legal world could throw my way." Roger cleared his throat, his expression unreadable. "You were the best." The waiter set our entrees before us, and the conversation continued. The thing about spending that much time with a man like Roger was that, eventually, you became his work wife, whether you intended to or not. And don't get me wrong, Roger had mastered the role of being a woman's work husband. I glanced at Kathy, studying her expression. Roger is better than most actual husbands in some ways. Isn't he, Kathy? She laughed, and Roger sat back, smug in his silent self-satisfaction. "Does he do that thing with you?" I asked, watching her carefully. She shifted uncomfortably in her seat. I remembered that reaction well. I had once been in Kathy's shoes, young, married to a workaholic, and drawn to the undeniable pull of a powerful, dominant man. I had wanted it all and never once considered the cost. I hadn't cared. Roger had swept me up effortlessly, carrying me into the suite above our office. He never pretended it was love, because it wasn't. It was something far more raw, far more consuming. And in my blind lust, I hadn't thought twice when he placed my small hand into the grip of another man at the bar of the DoubleTree near Philly. The final move. The airport meeting was straightforward. He was the CEO of one of our clients, and the whisper instruction in my ear was simple. Please him the way you would please me. That was the moment my life as a company girl truly began. Whenever we traveled, there was a 50-50 chance I'd be spending the night in a client's bed instead of my own or Roger's. And I wasn't the only one. At least half a dozen women were in the same position. Each of us carefully managed, well-rewarded, and generously compensated. I made twice what my C-suite husband earned, not to mention the perks. Designer clothes, 5-star dining, jewelry, and everything that came with playing the role of the perfect work wife. I became exactly what was expected of me, a company asset. And to be honest, I loved it. I wasn't forced. I wasn't tricked. I walked into it willingly, seduced by the power, the money, and the kind of passion that burned through every cell in my body. It was intoxicating. At least, until I ended up in the same position Kathy was in now. That's when everything fell apart. I studied her for a moment, my smile cool, glancing at Roger. The light caught the brilliance of the diamond on her finger, a large, pristine wedding ring. Her pedicure was flawless, and every inch of her outfit was curated for Roger's attention, not her husband's. The message was clear. Roger reached across the table, his fingers lightly brushing mine. Val, why don't you join us upstairs in the suite? His smile was laced with old memories, just for old time's sake. I met his gaze, but not with the same desire as before. Instead, I moved with intent. My hand slid a DVD case across the table toward Kathy, then another toward Roger. Their expressions shifted, confusion flickering in their eyes. I don't understand, one of them muttered. I didn't care, because I had lived this deja vu before, and I never wanted to relive it again. A large, imposing man approached the table. He stopped beside Kathy first. Are you Kathy Monroe Stevens? She glanced up, eyes widening. Yes. He placed a white legal envelope in front of her. You've been served. Roger frowned as the man turned to him. Are you Roger David Morris? Roger's jaw tightened. Yes, but what is this? The man handed him an identical envelope. You've been served. Roger immediately pulled out his phone, snapping photos of the documents before the process server briskly walked away. Kathy, still stunned, barely reacted as I leaned forward. Kathy, I represent your husband, Michael Stevens, in a divorce petition filed on grounds of adultery. Those documents also include a restraining order preventing you from being within 500 feet of your former home, your husband, and your children, until a magistrate rules otherwise. I turned my attention to Roger, whose face darkened. Roger, I represent your wife, Marjorie Cole Morris, in a similar filing. She's seeking divorce on the same grounds, along with an associated restraining order. My business cards are included in both packets, along with contact information for one of our firm's senior partners. If this case makes it to court, they'll be handling it. I gestured toward the DVDs I had given them earlier. These contain a sample of the evidence used in your spouse's petitions. I strongly suggest you both retain legal counsel, though I imagine you already know that. Roger's fingers tightened around the envelope, his nostrils flaring as he leaned in. What kind of twisted game is this? He hissed, voice sharp with controlled rage. I met his glare without flinching. The same kind you play with every woman who's ever walked into your office. 3 years ago, I had sat exactly where Kathy was now. Back then, Roger and a couple of his clients had been plying me with expensive food and endless drinks. They all knew the outcome. I was just an elevator ride away from being a sure thing upstairs. And they were absolutely right. But that night, just before I could disappear into Roger's suite, a towering man had approached our table and served me with separation papers. I could still picture it vividly. His flash of a camera, the click of the shutter as he captured the moment. My husband had been watching from a safe distance, witnessing everything. I had sat there, hands resting on the thighs of 2 different men, when the reality of my choices crashed down on me. As my husband turned and strode out of the restaurant, his head held high, I realized something devastating. I had become exactly what I never thought I'd be. A liar, a cheater, a disgrace. Roger had still tried to coax me upstairs that night, whispering promises of pleasure, but I had barely held back the urge to vomit. I had thought I was careful, that no one could possibly find out. But what an absolute fool I had been. There I was, in the middle of Antoine's, dressed like an expensive escort, draped in luxury, surrounded by powerful men. And my husband had been watching it all unfold. A year later, I was divorced. And my ex? He had moved on, happily dating a woman from his own office. There were no dramatic court battles, no drawn-out fights over assets. We lived in a joint property state. Dividing everything was cold, quick, and antiseptic. As I sat across from Kathy and Roger, I watched two figures rise from a nearby table. Without saying a word, they walked past us. Kathy barely lifted her head, but when she finally did, her breath caught. "David," she whispered in disbelief. I shook my head. "Remember the restraining order, Kathy. You'll have a chance to challenge it in court in the next 15 days. Until then, I strongly suggest you remain seated, unless you'd rather spend the night in jail." Roger sat motionless, his expression unreadable as his wife, Marjorie, passed him without a glance. His 9 lives were up. I stood, following my clients out of the restaurant, my heels clicking against the floor. As I walked, I couldn't help but wonder if my ex-husband was happy with his new wife. Of course, I already knew the answer. And as for me, I'd crawl across broken glass just to have him back. But later that night, I'd settle for a quiet glass of Pinot Gris. Alone. The end. Thanks for watching. Remember, Revolving Time exists because of your support. Subscribe now, and let's uncover more hidden secrets and truths together.